Everyone assumes small countries fear invasion. They don't. Invasion is obvious. It announces itself. It triggers alliances, headlines, and history books. What small countries actually fear is investment, because investment arrives quietly, wraps itself in opportunity, and rewrites the future without ever asking permission. In the modern world, borders are rarely crossed by armies first. They are crossed by spreadsheets, feasibility studies, and infrastructure proposals that look too sensible to reject. This is the part most people miss when they stare at maps and see emptiness, ice, water, distance. They assume nothing important happens there, but the places that look empty are often where global systems collide before anyone notices. And when systems collide, the smallest actors absorb the pressure long before the largest feel a thing. For centuries, the far north barely registered in strategic thinking. It was cold, inaccessible, and economically inconvenient. Empires expand toward productivity, not discomfort. There were no dense populations to tax, no markets to dominate, no trade routes worth fighting over, just darkness, ice, and time. That absence shaped everything. Borders were drawn with indifference. Security doctrines ignored it. Economists treated it as irrelevant. It was a place that existed, but did not matter. That assumption held not because the region was stable, but because the global system had no reason to touch it. Systems move where incentives pull them. For most of modern history, nothing pulled north. That changed quietly, without announcement, and without a single decisive moment. The ice did not suddenly melt one dramatic summer. Instead, global systems expanded until they reached it. Shipping networks stretched to save time and fuel. Satellite constellations needed polar coverage to function efficiently. Undersea cables followed shorter routes to reduce latency. Energy grids looked north for redundancy and resilience. Supply chains began tracing minerals essential for modern technology back to places once considered unreachable. The North did not become valuable overnight. It became connected. And when a place becomes connected, geography stops being passive. It starts charging rent. Power today does not come from owning land. It comes from controlling movement. Movement of goods across oceans, movement of data through fiber and satellites, movement of energy through grids and pipelines, movement of information through surveillance, standards, and access rules. In the far north, routes that once took months now take weeks. Signals that once avoided polar paths now depend on them. Digital transactions executed in milliseconds rely on infrastructure anchored in territories most people could not locate without assistance. And there are very few of those anchoring points. That scarcity is what turns geography into leverage. Whoever influences those nodes does not need to dominate the system. They only need to slow it down, redirect it, or make it conditional. This distinction matters because modern power rarely announces itself. In earlier eras, control required presence. Soldiers, administrators, flags, and occupation. Presence was expensive and visible, which made it resistible. Today, presence is optional. Influence hides inside contracts, maintenance agreements, insurance requirements, technical standards, and regulatory exceptions that sound apolitical but shape outcomes for decades. Consider a small coastal government approving a foreign-funded port project. On paper, it is unremarkable. Jobs are promised. Infrastructure improves. Economic activity increases. The legal framework appears clean. Political speeches frame it as pragmatic development. Opposition struggles to gain traction because opposing growth in regions that need it is politically dangerous. At first, the benefits are real. The port opens, traffic increases, local businesses profit. Officials congratulate themselves on having chosen progress over hesitation. Nothing feels compromised. Then global trade patterns shift, as they always do. That port becomes essential, not symbolically, but operationally. Shipping consolidates, alternative routes thin out, fees rise gradually, maintenance schedules are adjusted, access protocols tighten, insurance clauses change. Local authorities still nominally own the port, but decision-making drifts outward. Control does not disappear. It relocates. Nothing illegal occurs. No soldiers arrive. No flags change. Yet policy options quietly narrow. This is how modern power operates, not through overt control, but through dependency. Large states can absorb this pressure. They diversify suppliers, absorb inefficiencies, retaliate economically, and spread risk across multiple partners. Scale protects them. Small states do not have that luxury. They rely on single routes, single partners, single guarantees. That means every infrastructure decision becomes existential, though never theatrically so. It is bureaucratic existentialism, lived inside ministries, regulatory agencies, and finance departments, where decisions are incremental but consequences are permanent. This is where contemporary fear resides. Not fear of invasion, but fear of clauses, fear of obligations that cannot be reversed without cost. Imagine governing a country with a strong economy, a limited military, and legal responsibility for a territory whose global relevance is accelerating faster than your political system can adapt. You do not fully control its internal politics. You do not fully control its economic development. Yet you are responsible for its security, its stability, and its external relations. Every foreign proposal creates tension. Reject it, and you appear hostile to growth. Accept it, and you surrender leverage. Delay, and you signal weakness or indecision. Neutrality, once framed as moral restraint, becomes a mathematical problem. The danger is no longer choosing the wrong side. That logic belongs to a previous century. The real danger is losing the ability to choose at all. Once infrastructure is built, once debt is structured, once supply chains harden, choice evaporates quietly. Treaties do not undo spreadsheets. Alliances do not cancel contracts. Political speeches do not override private obligations signed years earlier under different conditions. Autonomy movements often imagine freedom as a switch. Declare independence, control destiny, but independence without capital is exposure. New political entities require ports, hospitals, power grids, data connectivity, transport networks. Capital arrives to fund those needs, but it never arrives neutral. It arrives with conditions that rarely sound ideological. They sound technical. Efficiency benchmarks, risk mitigation, long-term service agreements, preferred suppliers, jurisdictional carve-outs. Influence begins not when demands are made, but when frameworks are accepted. History offers structural parallels. In the 19th century, a small European state believed geography would shield it. Mountains, distance, and neutrality formed the core of its security thinking. It avoided entanglements and balanced trade carefully. Then railways arrived. Transit mattered more than borders. Foreign capital financed lines that optimized external interests. Steel dictated policy. The state survived, but only by surrendering strategic autonomy in ways that were not fully visible until decades later. History does not repeat itself. It reproduces patterns under new technologies. Today, the North is not being contested by armies. It is being formatted. Standards determine who can operate. Regulations decide who bears cost. Insurance frameworks define acceptable risk. Environmental compliance regimes shape access. Data routing protocols influence whose information flows efficiently and whose does not. Once these systems lock in, power becomes procedural. Enforcement replaces persuasion. There are three plausible futures for territories positioned at global choke points. One is security absorption, where external guarantees provide stability at the cost of autonomy. Decisions align with alliance priorities. Safety is purchased with dependence. Another is balanced openness, where multiple partners are engaged simultaneously, requiring constant negotiation and generating permanent pressure. Flexibility exists, but instability is endemic. Every shift in the global environment creates internal strain. The third is economic capture. Infrastructure is financed externally. Debt reshapes policy. Strategic decisions are outsourced indirectly. It is quiet, incremental, and largely irreversible. Only one of these futures is loud. Alliances come with expectations, but those expectations are visible. They can be debated, resisted, renegotiated. What is harder to confront is influence without obligation, investment without security guarantees, ownership without accountability. You cannot vote against a balance sheet. This is not just a northern story. It is a preview of how power will function across the system. Island states, transit corridors, resource-rich regions with small populations. Once a model works in one extreme environment, it normalizes everywhere else. Control the system, not the territory. Shape incentives, not ideology. Allow local actors to believe they are choosing freely while the menu of choices shrinks year by year. The old geopolitical question asked who controlled the land. The modern question asks who controls the systems that pass through it. Small states understand this instinctively. That is why they do not lose sleep over invasion scenarios. They lose sleep over offers that appear reasonable, beneficial, and urgent all at once. Because refusal carries a cost, delay carries a cost, and acceptance carries a cost that only becomes visible when alternatives no longer exist. The most dangerous moment is not when power arrives with force, it is when it arrives with consultants, financing models, and patient confidence. And the next place this story unfolds will not be frozen. It will be wherever global systems expand faster than sovereignty can adapt.